Today on Locked On Red Wings, where is the Yzer plan at? And what are the Philadelphia Flyers in for? We do a crossover with Locked On Flyers.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. And today, guys, we are going to do a crossover with Locked On Flyers. The reason why we didn't immediately just transition into that is because I got to tell you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. Scotty, this is the only chance we have alone to say anything. What do you want to say before I transition into an ad read? FanDuel.
For Locked On Flyers fans, we have been so excited for this episode and to get to talk to the guys at Locked On Red Wings to get just some insight about Steve Yzerman's tenure at the helm there and how the rebuild is going and what it could mean for the Flyers. Welcome, Brian and Scott from Locked On Red Wings.
Thanks for having us. We're really excited to do this crossover as the Red Wings look to take that step forward in their rebuild and, you know, maybe help provide some insight on what you guys as Flyers are probably in store for. And it's nothing short of painful, but being Flyers fans, I'm sure you're not too unfamiliar with that.
Yes, yeah. I'm very excited. The team that we have like the Philly curse thing that lasted for the Red Wings forever. Like we never win in Philly, literally ever. So definitely, definitely pumped to kind of pick your guys' brain as well.
Absolutely. So I think the first question we would have for y'all is, when did the Red Wings rebuild actually start? Was it in the Ken Holland era, or really was it when Yzerman took over?
Well, Red Wings fans, we believe that the rebuild didn't truly start until the summer of 2019 when Steve Yzerman took over, because Holland and Yzerman had very different roadmaps, let's say, to getting this team back on track. The waning years of the playoff streak was all about just keeping the streak alive. We were at 25 years, and Mike Ilitch, rest in peace, wanted that streak to go on as long as possible. Ken Holland was trading off assets to get over the hill vets like David Legwan to come in and try and keep that streak alive. And then it fell apart. And it became pretty clear pretty fast that Holland didn't really know how to build a rebuilding team. In fact, he never had to do so. When he took over the Red Wings as general manager, that team was already a championship contender. And for the first half of his tenure there, it was not a salary cap league. So he just had to throw money at guys. Once the salary cap started, he inherited some great prospects in Datsuk and Zetterberg. So, I mean, once this team really started to have to rebuild, it was clear, like I said, that he wasn't quite equipped with that. And then Yzerman came in, and basically anyone that Holland had was gone roster-wise. And we only have a handful of guys that he drafted on this team, Captain Dylan Larkin being one of them. But outside of that, Yzerman had no prospects in the cupboard, the cabinet, when he took over, and now it's stocked full. So for Red Wings fans, 2019 was the beginning of it. So we are entering, year 5 now. It'll be year 5 of the rebuild in our eyes.
Controversial question for sure.
Yeah, one of the hard things about a rebuild in any sport is it's not a perfect science, and then you could actually see things starting to fail while you're still rebuilding. And that's right now I see the Red Wings doing that because, like with Master Simone, it seems like they don't want any part of him. He just hasn't developed, and Zadina, he's pretty much done there. And so, these are, what maybe were thought to be good pieces down the road, and they haven't worked out. Now, of course, they're going to have plenty that work out too, but that's part of it. It's like, it's not easy to just have, you really can't have a full 100% homegrown rebuild. I can tell you that for sure.
Well, and that's why Yzerman has taken as many darts as possible to throw them at the board. Like every draft, he's had 11 or 12 picks, it seems.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing is it's like a lot of people like to differentiate like who is an Yzerman draft pick and who is a Ken Holland draft pick, and like Zadina is pretty much the cutoff for that, right? Like and there's still some like Holland picks that are trickling through, and there's a couple of late bloomers like Michael Rasmussen and whatnot. But I mean, yeah, that, you know, kind of piggybacking off the first question there, like that's why a lot of people argue over when the rebuild started, and why if you ask Yzerman, it's when he took over as well.
Sure, but I will tell you this, you know, the scouts, and when Ken Holland made those picks, it's still the Yzerman crew there that are developing. So
sure.
that's what you have to count the crew that's there trying to develop them regardless.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the prospects that they have already, like Zadina, and it's revisionist history now in Red Wings land that, you know, because Ken Holland or Zadina was a Ken Holland pick, that Zadina was just like the bad pick. But if you asked Red Wing fans in 2018 what they thought of the Zadina pick, we were overwhelmingly positive about it, because Zadina,
I liked it a lot too. I was a big Zadina guy. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, and I was pumped about it too. And it's revisionist history because it didn't work out to say, oh, typical Ken Holland didn't work out. But then you see it. This is where I don't think Ken Holland necessarily ran, because a lot of the scouts are the same. There's a lot, like Hakan Anderson's been there since like the 90s. You know, it's almost
some of the scouting directors got changed. That's what changed.
Yeah, because Draper is now the amateur scout director. So it got to a point where like people just like to criticize whatever Ken Holland did, when not everything he did was bad. I don't think Michael Rasmussen should have been taken at 9, but he's turned into a nice piece for the Red Wings. He really had a breakout season last year before his injury. So there are some nice pieces that the Red Wings have that were from the Ken Holland era. So when you look at the Red Wings rebuild, though, overall, I mean, I like a lot of what Steve Yzerman has done. He focused a lot on the blue line. You know, Moritz Seider, we talk about how he loved the Zadina pick when he was drafted. A lot of us were scratching our heads when Moritz Seider was picked at 6th overall. And
not me. I was jealous. Super jealous.
I had a lot of info on Seider. I admit it. I mean, I get to watch a certain amount of video with Instat, but I also had 3 reporters that I could lean on in the DEL to ask about during the year a few different times. So it made me look smarter. I admit that.
I mean, he's been absolutely fantastic. And he's really put an emphasis on the blue line early on in the draft. And, you know, this year, our biggest problem was that they didn't have any goal scoring and really any center depth. They got Marco Kasper last year at
does not sound familiar at all.
Right. But then he went out there and got DeBrincat. He drafted Nate Danielson, who he thinks is going to be a great two-way center. He's got Carter Mazur, who looks like he could be a good middle 6 winger. Jonathan Berggren, I think, is pretty underrated as a prospect in NHL land in general. Jonathan Berggren is going to be a pretty solid middle 6. But the problem is still, outside of DeBrincat, goal scoring in general. He's built up that D-core so well, but now it's time to focus on goal scoring. But it makes sense. Like we talk about, you know, want to make an analogy to the NFL, building the trenches, right? That's where a lot of NFL teams begin, because you can have a lot of success just by having a good offensive and defensive line. Well, the Red Wings are doing the same thing in the NHL version, having a good blue line. Though a lot of those guys aren't at the NHL level yet. But you got William Wallander, you got Albert Johansson, Simon Edvinsson, obviously, and now Axel Sandin Pellikka. Like you have just a plethora of NHL caliber defensemen, guys who are ready. Now, obviously not Pellikka yet, but 3 of those guys are damn near NHL ready right now. So it's going to be a competitive roster in the next couple of years, which is why the Red Wings are poised to really take that step forward, hopefully sooner rather than later. The problem then just becomes, you look at the division they play in, and it gets a lot more daunting.
Yeah, so you mentioned DeBrincat, and to me, when you go after a big fish like that and you get them, that means like you're sort of coming out of the rebuild and you're in a different phase of your progress. Would you agree or disagree with that statement? And how big an impact do you think he'll have?
Yeah, I think that is not only the mindset within the organization, but I really do think that that's the fan base's mindset too. And like Brian brings up the division, and that's obviously a great point and something that we, you know, it's kind of out of our control to an extent, right? Like it's a really, really good division. But I think that going out and making a move like that with such a prolific goal scorer already at such a young age, like that's the kind of move where you almost like circle it on your calendar. And that's when not the like ascension, right? Like they were better last year than they were the year before, but you kind of point to that and be like, that's when the front office kind of flipped from, oh, we're going to keep trading off assets and keep trying to get younger and younger to like, okay, now it's not that DeBrincat's like 35 or anything like that, but like now it's like, okay, we're actually trying to win right now, which is something that I don't think this organization has really been able to say in 7 years at least, if not, tag another year onto that. So yeah, it's super exciting. And I completely agree with that. As far as like his impact goes, I mean, he's going to be on a line with Dylan Larkin. And we just talked about this on Monday's show for us, where Larkin is playmaker first. And like he'll get, his 30 goals if he plays a full season, but he's playmaker first. And having that, this is probably the best goal scorer that Dylan Larkin's ever shared a line with in his entire career. Like there's a legitimate argument for that. So I think that it's A, just exciting, but B, when talking about what this team needed, like they made a lot of improvements last year, and the biggest thing that they needed was just a pure top end goal scorer, and putting that alongside Dylan Larkin is incredibly exciting.
Time to take a break from the action to tell you guys about FanDuel. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit that first home run. All on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
Yeah, one thing Steve Yzerman has shown is he doesn't want to spend money on goaltending. He keeps rotating them around, and I think Husso's pretty good, and I do like Kosa. I don't know exactly what Kosa's high end. Like in his draft year, I liked him, but not as much as other people. So we don't know how long he'll take. But in the end, Yzerman doesn't want to spend a lot on goaltending. You do kind of wonder, is that going to be the area where in a year or two, they're all of a sudden like the Hurricanes, and they're still looking for that because Kosa hasn't come around yet, and he still needs a little more time. That could be the problem.
Yeah, I agree with you. That was a huge need a couple off seasons ago, and that's why when they drafted Kosa and they traded for Nedeljkovic, I mean, Scotty and I were like, oh my God, they addressed the goaltending issue, because we were thinking that Nedeljkovic coming off a Calder finalist year, at that time, I didn't quite realize the system that Carolina puts together kind of shelters goalies. Really, like you look at every goalie that's ever played for Carolina in the last 5 years, they have career years, then go on elsewhere to not replicate that. So we were thinking it's solved, the problem's over, and then Nedeljkovic ends up not being anything close to what we were hoping. And then on top of that, Sebastian Kosa, goalies are weird, right? Development is strange for goalies. It's hard to project. He went to Grand Rapids first, the AHL farm club, and he struggled. And then they sent him to the ECHL club, the Toledo Walleye, and he struggled at first, but then he got his crap together, and he was phenomenal the rest of the season at the ECHL level. So while it's great to see, okay, this guy they spent a first-round draft pick on has been fantastic, well, now we have to see him do it at the AHL level. And that's the thing is he is basically going to have an open door to be the goalie at the AHL level. It's going to be him and Alex Lyon pretty much competing for that. John Letherman, also the other goaltender for the ECHL Toledo Walleye, was fantastic as well. He got signed to an NHL contract with the Red Wings, so it's going to be him and Kosa basically competing for that AHL roster spot. But I mean, we got goalies you can't predict. It could be another. Goalies have rookie seasons at age 27. So who knows when he's going to finally make it? Which I think is why Augustine was the other goalie they drafted early in the second round this year, because they realized that depth is still an issue. But I think you're right on the money, Russ. This team could be ready to compete and then still be searching for a goalie if Kosa doesn't work out. And that's the biggest question mark is you almost have to just pray that Kosa works out. So this team
it's not even that he doesn't work out, just if he does take the long development cycle. That's all.
And he's
For
like,
sure.
what, 22 now, maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know off the top
Yeah.
of my head. So it could be another 5 years before he's ready as a
I don't
stud
think it
NHL
will be, but it could be. It's not
But
impossible.
that's the point. It's not impossible. Like they definitely need to be deeper in that field so that
Yeah.
you can have that. Reimer, career wise, typically is better than he was last year. He's been like I think his career save percentage is like 908, something along those lines. Pretty good throughout the most of his career. He's older now. You hope he can rebound off that bad year. And if not, then maybe Alex Lyon can replicate what he did with the Panthers during the regular season in that small sample size. But, you definitely have a big question mark at goaltending. Nothing you can definitely lean on and say that's the guy.
Well, yeah, and
Yeah,
that's
well, we know Alex Lyon pretty well
True.
as well. Spent some time in our organization, and he has his moments where he shines like that.
We'll take it. We'll take a guy. I mean, he's going to go into the season as, the I guess like makeshift third stringer, but like, yeah, that was like to Brian's point that goaltender is a position where the 1B to Husso is still like a pretty big question mark and has been for ever since we brought in Husso, right? Like that's been the 1B, really whoever the 1A is. The 1B has been a huge question for the last 2 or 3 years now, and like you need two goalies really in today's day and age of hockey, unless you got one of the few that's going to go out there and play like 65 games or something like that. Like you really need to at least have a reliable option there. And so yeah, we're hoping we found that with Reimer, but they got deeper, and I think that was the alternative. They were like, look, no one out there that we can get this summer is going to immediately be able to plug in, and like we're going to have all the confidence in the world that they can be a legitimate 1B. So we're just going to bring in like 13 goalies in one offseason instead, and just address depth instead of have a solidified number 2 there, because it really wasn't available.
Yeah. So given all that, like what's the pressure like on the Red Wings this upcoming season, given where you are in this rebuild path?
Yeah,
Go
I mean, I think that this is the first year where there is pressure, and like the first few years after Yzerman was hired, there was really this like this dude can do no wrong. It doesn't matter. Like the team is so bad, and he's tearing it down even more, and it's already bad, right? And then like the COVID year, they bottomed out and were on pace to be one of the worst teams I've ever seen in my life, and like so they do bottom out, and like Yzerman's just kind of untouchable. Like you can't really criticize him. He inherited nothing. He inherited no farm, no NHL talent. It was really an empty cabinet that he took over from Holland, and so he kind of got off without any criticism really of any sort, and it was just kind of this cool story like Yzerman's back home kind of thing. I think this is last year you finally, for the first time, started to see some rumblings. Not that, people certainly don't have pitchforks, and he still is like very, very well liked, and his approval rating, I would imagine, would still be very, very high at the present moment. But it was the first time you kind of started people seeing like, hey, we're getting really impatient here. Can we like kind of get the show on the road? And I think the DeBrincat trade really, really kind of signified that, as you alluded to earlier. But I do think there's pressure. I think this is the first year in Yzerman's entire tenure where there really is pressure, like legitimately. I don't think anyone was going into last season expecting this to be a playoff team, and certainly none of the years before that. Like this is really the first year since Yzerman took over that there is any sort of pressure, and I think it's decent. Not that people are gonna be again like grabbing pitchforks if they miss the playoffs this year, but as long as there's sizable improvement, I think most people will understand. But yeah, I think there is, for probably the first time in almost a decade, to be honest.
Yeah, I completely agree with Scotty. I think that if the team doesn't start taking noticeable steps forward, like they've been incrementally getting better in the standings and points wise last few years, but this is, and to his defense, right? Like we talk about how he could do no wrong the first few years. I mean, he's had to try and put together a competitive roster without a top 3 draft pick at any point. There was all those years the Red Wings were one of the worst teams in the league, and the draft lottery screwed them every single year. It's
they had no luck. That's true.
No luck. And you look at the teams that have taken steps forward in recent years, and they have had lottery luck. I mean, the Buffalo Sabres, for instance, they flipped their number 2 overall pick, Jack Eichel, and turned that into a couple of really good players. They had Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power. The Devils is another example. Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier. The Rangers recently. Of course, Capo Caco and Lafreniere haven't necessarily been super vital to their rebuild, but my point still stands is every single team that's taken a huge step forward has gotten lottery luck. The Red Wings haven't gotten that. They've had to pull diamonds out of the rough. I think Lucas Raymond at 4th overall might just end up being the second best player in that draft next to Tim Stutzla. Tim Stutzla's been fantastic.
Yeah, I don't think anybody would be shocked at that, though. That wouldn't shock me. I was very high on Raymond, so that was a smart pick.
Moritz Seider, again, I go back to him. After that, it's been pretty much safe picks. I think Simon Edmondson was a safe pick. I think Marco Kasper was a safe pick. I think Nate Danielson was a safe pick. But
Danielson is the safest of safe picks, but I'm not a huge fan. Kasper is a safe pick, but I do like a lot of Kasper. Danielson, to me, is like, seems a little ordinary, but we'll see.
Yeah, and so Yzerman's had to build a competitive roster without that lottery luck, and I think this is Red Wings fans are just kind of so fed up with being. And last year they were competitive and they were in it up until like about the trade deadline. They didn't get officially eliminated until the last week of the season. But this year, like, you can't get caught in that middle, right? Like, you get caught in that middle. Like I like to call the Minnesota Wild, where they're for like 2 straight decades, they always finished right outside the playoffs or first round exit. Like, you don't want to get stuck there. And so Yzerman's got to find a way to make this team take a leap into serious competitiveness, while at the same time doing it without having the insane luck some of these other teams get. Chicago Blackhawks losing Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane, then immediately getting Connor Bedard. Don't get me started on that. So it's just it's a predicament.
You'll get no argument from us on that.
No, you won't.
Ridiculous. But he's done a great job so far. But the pressure's definitely on to like make this team take the leap.
Yeah, talking about pressure and also impatience. So let's talk Joe Veleno. Now it's funny because like I really did like him in his draft year, and I remember he had this big scoring drought, and he vowed to me like that's going to end, and I guess it did until he got to the pros, and now it's back. I did look at his numbers, and I was surprised that if you add up his blocks and misses of shots, it's almost equal to the amount of shots he took, which isn't a lot, 85. But if you add it all up, then it's like 150. But he had 9 goals. Like we all see that he could do better than that, but why isn't he doing better than that? Is it the opportunity? Is it just bad shot selection? Like, I haven't seen enough of Veleno to be able to put my finger on it.
Well, I mean, that's a fantastic question that I think a lot of people, I don't really know if there's like a term for it, but I guess like prove it year. Like, this really is a huge year for Joe Veleno. If Joe Veleno doesn't take a step forward, I think not only the fan base, but I think the front office might take a legit look in the mirror and be like, is this dude actually like a part, like longed for this kind of direction that we are heading? And because last year was, to your point, like a pretty, not like disappointment seems a little dramatic, but like it definitely wasn't, he hasn't really lived up to what a lot of people at one point thought he would be able to do at the NHL level. And the frustrating thing about Veleno is he has shown flashes at the end of the year before last. For the last, I don't know, there was like a 1-month stretch in there. Larkin was hurt, like Burt was hurt. We had a ton of injuries, and he went up and played like first line for like a couple of weeks. And at the beginning, it was like, wow, this is kind of wild. But there were a couple of games where you were like, wow, like this is like, he actually looks really solid. And not that he was producing a boatload, but he definitely didn't look overwhelmed. And he looks like pretty solid up there. And this past season was just a really, like, people throw around the term like invisible on the ice. Like, that's pretty much like what Joe Veleno was last season. Like, bottom 6, wasn't necessarily a liability out there, but I mean, certainly wasn't like driving offense either. I just, for me, I don't think that he is like a plus enough in any like specific aspect of like being a forward at the NHL to really like take that monumental step forward. And I still have hope for him. I still loved him when he was a prospect, and I think that it's possible for him to, he's still young, right? He can continue to develop, but I do think that he just, there's no area that you're like, oh, well, if he's going to succeed, it's going to be because he's really good at that. Like, there just isn't that. And he's not bad at anything either, but like there just isn't like an overwhelming, I don't know. Like again, if he doesn't do well this year, I think a lot of people are really going to start changing their tune even more than they already have, to like, this dude might just be kind of like a fourth line, solid bottom 6 forward at the NHL level.
I want to switch gears a little bit because one of the things in the Flyers rebuild land, like the big questions that a lot of fans have, is hiring John Tortorella when we did to be the head coach. He's not like a rebuild coach kind of
No.
guy. And I know the Red Wings made a coaching change in the middle of the rebuild. And I'm just wondering if that really relates to the whole rebuild process. And how do you think it's gone in Detroit on that front?
Derek Lalonde, I think it was the right time to get a new head coach. And I think Derek Lalonde the Red Wings were the perfect team for a guy like Derek Lalonde to have his first head coaching gig. Jeff Blashill had been there since, I think, the last couple of years of the playoff run and all the way through the bottoming out of the rebuild. And fans rather, were calling for Jeff Blashill's head for several seasons now. But it didn't make sense to bring in a new head coach when the team was still not going to be a competitive roster, or a team not at least making that change towards being competitive. And so they kept him, but then it became very apparent at the end of the 2022 season that his message got stale. I mean, the second half of that season, and Scotty and I remember it the opposite of fondly. It was very painful. They were getting blown out almost every single game. It was crazy, like 6-7 goals. I remember there was one game. Didn't the Penguins score like 11 on the Red Wings at one point during that season, Scotty?
Correct. Yes.
It was very apparent that, like, okay, they were not responding to Blashill in the locker room anymore. And it was just time. And it kind of signaled you're bringing in a coach that came from I believe Derek Lalonde was one of Yzerman's last hires in Tampa before he left to come back towards Detroit, or at least that weird, like, took that gap year, like kids do between high school and college, where he was still part of the Tampa Bay organization, but he wasn't their general manager anymore. So he kind of had some familiarity with Derek Lalonde. He came from the Tampa Bay Lightning system, which is a system that Yzerman helped to grow. And it was a good opportunity because it's hard to get like a coach with pedigree, like really good pedigree. I'm not talking about like a carousel coach. A coach with really good pedigree to come to a rebuilding team. I think Yzerman took a flyer on a guy who came from a good system, who he thought was going to implement a defense-first mentality, because Yzerman's been drafting nothing but defensemen, and that's been very clear what his Derek Lalonde's mantra has been defense first. So, I mean, it is a huge thing for the Detroit Red Wings that this system take a step forward this year, because as much better as the Red Wings were in year one over the last year of Blashill, they were still pretty bad last year. But now in year two of everybody knowing the system, it's time for that system to really click into place and learn. As far as the Flyers go, I was baffled when they hired John Tortorella last season, because, I mean, you guys can speak on the John Tortorella thing way more than I could, but that roster didn't look like a competitive roster to me. And it felt like the Flyers were trying to go for it when they shouldn't have been. And they get a coach who, and to John Tortorella's credit, everywhere he goes, the first couple of years are usually like he puts a fire under their ass and they make it to the playoffs. Look at the Blue Jackets. But then after like 2 or 3 years, it just kind of falls off. So I was like, is John Tortorella really the right coach for this Flyers team? And I mean, it ended with your general manager getting fired right after the trade deadline. So maybe it didn't work out. But I mean, like, you tell me, like, what do you think about the Tortorella situation?
Well, I mean, I could answer easily. Yeah, they hired him because they thought they were in a winning situation, and quickly, and a lot of us didn't buy it. But when Fletcher figured out they weren't in a winning situation anymore, and Tortorella figured it out maybe like 3/4 into the season last year. Even he admitted then at that point, this job's going to be a lot harder than I thought. So that's to me, that said a lot.
The craziest thing about the Torts thing to me was just the timing of all of it, because, like, to Brian's point, I don't think anyone, I mean, like, you just spoke on it too, like, I don't think anyone was really like fooled by like the like all in win now type of thing. And
yeah,
like, of all years when there's a generational prospect at the top of the lottery, like, that just seems like the last like thing that I would want to do unless I was 100% sure I was going to win. So I think that was the biggest thing for me personally, was just like, really, like, we're and like, who knows how much Torts really influenced them, but like, you guys played yourselves out of, not that, you know, your roster was necessarily as bad as those teams that finished at the very bottom, but like you ended up being kind of in that like closer to that no man's land, you know, as Brian said, the Minnesota Wild area as far as draft position go.
It's the Chuck Fletcher special, we'll call it.
I do have a question for you guys, though, regarding a very coveted winger in your guys' system, Travis Konechny. You know, he's got 2 years left on his making $5.5 million, 26 years old, prime of his career, had 35 goals, something like that last year. I mean, if the Flyers are entering a full-scale rebuild, you would think that Travis Konechny, even at 26 years old, considering how long rebuilds can take, might not be part of that future. And him having, you know, that's a very nice number on his contract, $5.5 million for 2 more years at his production. I mean, is he like a prime candidate get traded this offseason or at the deadline? Or do you guys think he's going to be there to help usher in the next Flyers era?
I mean, I think a decision is going to be made at trade deadline. And, you know, depending on how he does this upcoming season up through the deadline, I think that that's just going to be the deciding factor, that if he's successful enough that they could sell really, really high, they're going to do it. If he's not successful enough to sell high, they may wait until the off season to try and get a better return. But I think that I think that there's a very, very small chance he'll be around for the duration of the rebuild, just given that affordability, given the skill set, given the timeline, ostensibly. I mean, looking at the Red Wings, that's, 4 or 5 years to get playoff competitive. If that's what the Flyers are in for, and there's some, there's some parallels to be made there with former star player coming back to GM the team. I think that maybe for Konechny and his own interest, it may be better for him to be elsewhere as well.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is, based on things that I had heard on good authority is, I'm pretty sure Briere did talk to Yzerman, and it was a quick call. Like, he didn't get anywhere near what he was hoping. Yzerman went with the usual, I don't want to say lowball offer, but
no, it is.
Yeah,
you can say it. Yeah.
And so I think after that's when Briere was kind of like, all right, we're just going to hang on to him right now. But I think that's who because Yzerman probably reached out because he saw Konechny as kind of one of those guys that could really help. That I think that's when Briere realized, all right, this isn't the time to trade him. But I'm going to flip this back on you guys, and I'm going to ask you a really tough question, because while I was thinking about it, I had to come up with an answer for myself, and that is, do the Red Wings miss Jim Nill? And I think they do. And that's not to say that Yzerman can't do the job or isn't going to do the job, but I think Jim Nill did some things there that not only helped Ken Holland, but really helped the scouting department, helped a lot of different things, where it wasn't just like when Nill left, I think they lost more than just one guy at one position, because I think he affected a lot of different departments.
I think you're spot on. Jim Nill was a huge reason why the Red Wings were so successful in that window where they were successful. And he did take some of their best talent organizational wise with them in the front office. And so it did suck. And then happened again recently where the Red Wings just lost Pat Verbeek to the Anaheim Ducks. Yeah. I mean, the Red Wings, be it the Ken Holland era or the Yzerman era, tend to be able to generate front office candidates pretty often. I don't know what kind of system they're running, but they just seem to groom them. And it did hurt. Like, losing Jim Nill, I think, accelerated kind of their descent, because Jim Nill in the era of Ken Holland probably helped steer him away from some of the mistakes or steer him towards some of the biggest successes that they had. Because I go back to the fact that as much as we like to harp on Ken Holland's era as general manager of the Detroit Red Wings, like, it's a team effort, right? Like, he gets the ultimate blame and, praise when things go right and when things go wrong, but it's not just Ken Holland that makes those decisions. And Jim Nill leaving, I think, hugely affected the success of the franchise. It was massive.
Yeah, I don't really have too much more to add. Absolutely, though, like the shakeup that this front office has had over the last 7 years with, subtractions right at the end of the Holland era and the end of the Nill era, and then the additions that they've had over the last 4 or 5 is like certainly, rebuild was not just on the ice. Like it really was, top to bottom in a lot of aspects for sure. And that was certainly one of them. I do really quickly. I am a huge Carter Hart fan, and I don't even have like a specific question in regards to him. I just want to know, like, his career has been such I guess like roller coaster is kind of the word I want to use, right? Like he was called up so young, and then at one point like struggled for a little bit, and there was kind of a target on his back, and it's been a lot of bumps, even if they are kind of small hills at points. And I just want to know what the current mindset within the fan base and what you believe the mindset is of the front office in regards to Hart and his role on the team going forward.
I mean, I'll answer the front office one. I think the mindset of the front office is they like him. They haven't offered him a contract because they don't know what's going on with Hockey Canada.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of hamstrung with that because they probably would like to see, and they may have an idea of what he's going to look for and then sort of decide if he's going to be there on the other side of the rebuild. So they're kind of stuck. They can't do anything right now.
Gotcha.
It's like where John Gibson was with the Ducks for all those years. Just kind of that weird, like, should they move on? Should they not? We don't really know kind of a thing. Fair enough.
Yeah. That Hockey Canada thing is really just, screeching everything to a halt with everything in terms of, is there going to be some sort of situation where they're going to have to look elsewhere for goaltending? We just don't know. But on the ice, I would say, obviously he's had some injury problems, but I think the general perception is that it's been the defense in front of him that's the problem and not him. So I think that he does have support in the fan base.
And, you bring up a good point because as much as, I was harping on Alex Nedeljkovic, and him and Ville Husso's goals saved above expected this past year were pretty abysmal, some of the worst in hockey, but the Red Wings defense in front of him was literally one defensive pair. It was Moritz Seider and Jake Wallman. Outside of that, Olli Maatta had a great start to the year, kind of fell apart. They dealt Phil Peronic away at the deadline. Ben Sherrod is Ben Sherratt. That's as far as I will say about Ben Sherratt.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to just bag on the guy. And then the other guy, it was no one could ever solidify the sixth defensive spot. It was a rotation of Osterley, Robert Haig, and Gustav Lindstrom because none of them were ever good to be an everydayer. Yeah.
Robert Haig, baby.
We actually kind of like Robert Haig. Not gonna lie,
we do too.
He's a likable guy.
He's a good guy.
But it was just like likable guy, but not an everydayer in this lineup. And
he's a great seventh D man.
To not be an everydayer on the Red Wings, and there being three defensemen who can't. They were carrying like 9 D-man, and 3 of them couldn't figure out how to be the 6th defenseman full time. Like the Red Wings defensive situation was abysmal last year. So, Ville Husso had a really rough second half of the year after starting fantastic. Same thing happened to Nedeljkovic the year before. So like with a better, like as much as people like to bag on the Justin Hall contract, I think I honestly, I know he was putrid in the playoffs, but I think he gets a little bit too much blame because he comes from the Toronto media market. I think he became their scapegoat. I think he's a better defenseman than they say he is. And we're
going to clip this for prosperity because I'm not sure. This could be a bad hill to die on.
I'm not dying on it. I'm saying he's a better defenseman. I'm not saying he's a good defenseman.
Okay. All right.
He's going to be exactly what the Red Wings signed him to be. I think he's going to be he's overpaid because the free agent market was too much. That you can't argue that everyone is overpaid this year. It's free agency every single year, especially in this weak market. I think Comfer was overpaid, but I still like the signing. But Justin Hall is an improvement over their roster from last year. If you look at who was on their defensive core, Shane Gostisbehere, I love that signing so much. How have we not talked about Gostisbehere yet? Like fantastic. Really, I love that signing. So it is, even though you look at the players they sign, you go, this is better. Yes, it is better than what they had last year. So hopefully Ville Husso can kind of have a little bit of a bounce back year, given that the pair in front of him or the core in front of him is going to be at least incrementally better than what it was the year prior.
And Ghost is a lot of fun. I think you'll enjoy having him.
He brings offense to that back end, which desperately needs it.
Yeah.
We literally both have like Ghost as like our favorite addition of outside of, I guess, DeBrincat now. Our favorite free agent signing, we'll say, of the entire offseason.
Nice. So I guess, given where the Red Wings are right now, like what advice would you give to Flyers fans in terms of patience and dealing with the next several years?
That's a great question. I think that
grit your teeth and bear it.
Right. I think that within that question, I think is honestly like where the answer comes a lot of times. Like it's one of those things where like patience is something that not only like the fan base, I'm not really like as worried about, and like you guys are much more in tune to that than I am, obviously. But like last season, we just talked about right, like their decision to go with Torts, right? Like that almost feels like instead of the fan base being impatient, that almost feels like a front office impatient move. And I think that that's something that the stars need to align there. Like we've talked about the Minnesota Wild like 8 times in this episode for some reason, but like they like you need to have a direction. Like you can't within like our city, like the Pistons did it too. Like they were the best team to miss the playoffs for like 12 years and didn't do anything. Like you just have to pick a direction. And if that ends up being, like continuing to trade off pieces, like some of the names we've already talked about today, or whether that's just like this, ride or die, like we're going to see what happens and we're just going to keep building around it. At least it is a direction. You cannot do the caught in the middle thing. And that's really like, I would say, even if you disagree with the direction they pick, as long as they pick a direction, you're better off than a lot of other franchises.
Yeah, I think Scotty nailed it. Pick a direction and commit to it, because you can't flip flop year in and year out. I mean, another example, I think, to get off to leave Seth's Minnesota Wild alone, I think the Columbus Blue Jackets are another great example of a team that flip flops every single year, right, deciding whether or not they're rebuilding or they want to commit. And it's painful. It's going to suck. It has sucked. I mean, especially I'm 27 years old. I've been blessed. I was up until they weren't in the playoffs. I knew nothing but playoff success my entire life. I mean, I was born in 96 and 97, 98, 02, 08. All that was in my lifespan. And then boom, now they're bottom of the barrel, and you just got to commit to that. And they can get hot. You got to realize, just stay realistic with what you have. And kind of honestly, us included, like, we tend to overvalue our own players as well. You got to be realistic with what you got. On your NHL roster, you might have a player that is a fan favorite, but you have to ask yourself, is this player really going to be on this roster when this team's ready to compete? I mean, Travis Konechny, I guess, I go back to that example. Like, he's great. He's a fantastic player. And if this roster was ready to compete now, he'd be a great piece to have. But this
is going to be me when they trade Scott Lawton, and I'm going to cry many tears, because I just love the guy. And he's a perfect, like, third liner, like, contributor, great leader. And I love everything about him.
Well, and we love Darren Helm, but I mean, at some point you gotta let him go, because that's just the reality of it. Rebuilds take oftentimes like 5 years at least. I mean, we're entering year 5 and we're hoping that the Red Wings can make waves in a very competitive Atlantic division, and that's not even a guarantee. So, I mean, it's just be patient, be realistic with what you have, and commit to that rebuild, because it's gonna suck. But the prospects you can get back in return, I mean, if you get lucky with the lottery, especially, I mean, you could be looking at 5 years of pain turning into 10 years of success. Just, you got to be patient.
Yeah, I think the Mitchkov pick showed that, Danny Briere was willing to, take some chances and just to kind of go for it in terms of the plan, and now he has a goal for 3 years from now. He's got to have a team that's ready for Matvei Mitchkov to come over and play it. And I think that was a really good thing for him, and to be able to set the tone for where the team is going.
I love it. One of my favorite picks of the draft, for real.
Yeah, I like that one a lot.
So I think really, as far as where the Flyers are going from an outside perspective, like, what's your confidence level in Danny Briere?
That's funny. This is one where it's like weirdly tough for me. So, like, full disclosure, that like the last Flyers team to make the cup is like literally my favorite non-Red Wings team ever. Like the Wayne Simmons, Scotty Hartnell, like Danny Briere, Yager, like that's like I loved, and like they played Chicago, which helped, but like I loved that team. And so like when I found out that, like, the Briere like just seeing that name and just being like, oh, like that's, the new GM, like that would put a smile on my face. I mean, to kind of echo some of the points I made in the last question you asked, like, the Torts decision is, and I know that it's like, there's a GM change and whatnot, but it's again, like, just pick a direction. Like, everyone just be in unison. Everyone hold hands and close your eyes and pick a direction and just go for it. I love the start to it. And like I said, I love your draft this year. I really do. It's just, for me, I think the next 12 months are going to be like the most telling for this kind of regime. I think between another year of free agency next year, another trade deadline this year, we're actually going to see the direction that we've been talking about so much that they end up picking kind of come to fruition. So I think it's, not to cop out, but I think it's like a ask me on July 31st of next year kind of thing.
That's fair.
Than anything else, because it's
That's
still so
totally
early
fair.
on.
I mean, I have my questions regarding the hire. I mean, obviously, Steve Yzerman coming back was like a dream come true, and hiring former, all-time greats or notable players is kind of chic now. I mean, Red Wings is a plethora of old boys club. Chris Draper is your
the entire front office is an old boys
Nick
club.
Lidstrom's in there.
Well, that's
Carmel's in
what's
there,
so
Dent Cleary's in
similar, right?
there. Yeah.
Is that it's, Keith Jones is the team president, and then they hired Patrick Sharp and they hired John LeClaire. I mean, it's like crazy, like the similarities.
The only caveat I would have to that is that when Yzerman was doing that, those guys had more experience.
Well, and that's exactly kind of where I was going. Daniel Briere was a special assistant previous to this, right? And it was named as the interim general manager. So how much of a role? That's why I'm kind of like, it's definitely going to be a wait and see type thing. Yzerman kind of had that pedigree already. And granted, when he went to Tampa, they already had Steven Stamkos. They already had a couple really good pieces, but then he built on that, drafting Andrei Vasilevsky, drafting Nikita Kucherov, guys like that. He brought in more talent. He built that roster. Ultimately, they won this.
But he also had a chance for Draper to work a year in a different job and then promote him, where these guys are just getting the promotions, So.
Bingo. Exactly. That's why I'm a little bit... I love the idea because, like, if Briere is basically a hero in that town, he can become a greater hero, but you also risk tarnishing your legacy, much like Joe Dumars did with the Pistons here in Detroit. So, I mean,
or Ron Hextall. I mean,
exactly.
It's an interesting move. I'm really curious to see how it's going to plan out. He hasn't done anything yet. I mean, drafting Michkov to me was a no-brainer. It sounds like Michkov kind of, from what I heard, maybe forced his way into Philadelphia. Being that he was like a Russian. I don't know how much truth there is to that. That's more hearsay.
I think he helped steer it. I think that's fair.
But it's definitely, like Scotty said, it's a wait and see approach. Like, you're going to ask again next year and we'll see where we think he has done, what he has done, because this was an ownership decision, right? The president of hockey ops and general manager were hired on the same day. It wasn't like your president hired your next general manager and internally decided Briere was the best case scenario. Okay. Right. I just want to make sure I got that right. So yeah, definitely. I'm going to want to watch before I make any definitive statements on what I think of Briere.
Fair enough. All right, guys, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll have to touch base again during the season or toward the trade deadline and see what you're willing to give us for Travis Konechny then.
Right.
Yes.
It'll be a telling time for both of us for sure.
If we're having that conversation, the Red Wings season has gone well.
Yep.
So awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
We ball.